those article when it said it was explosive?
Shrapnel.
Shrapnel?
Yeah.
How many was stuck, did it ever say how many was?
No,
in
it
space?
didn't specify how many pieces.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't specify.
Ah,
Yeah. Because shrapnel, of course, it could be
it can-
varying sizes, yeah, and it could be like,
And it can
Yeah.
bend in some different ways. And
exactly. So it doesn't make for a pretty wound, that's for sure.
Oh,
Yeah. So poor Barney.
yeah.
And like I said, he was only in the hospital for, he was only out of a commission for 6 weeks and we sent him out. Tough thing to do. Because I'd be out of action for longer than that.
So they always kept detailed information
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah. Maybe I just gotta take a step back there. Most of my research is based on a couple of different sources. The first source is the personnel records. Each soldier has a record about his career, from the beginning to the end. That's all available. And the battalions, or in other words, the units, they all kept war diaries. Every day, everything is written down. So you can put together, those are the two main sources. There's lots of other sources.
Timelines, right?
Hey?
You get a good timeline.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why it's easier just to tell the story, especially if I want to cover more than one soldier. It's easier to do it chronologically. We just start at one end and go that way. But yeah, the wealth of information that's available is just unbelievable. And so again, we're going to do the meanwhile back here. This is one thing, and I don't want to start ranking soldiers and all that there, because I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they're all heroic in one sense. They all volunteered. But if you're going to remember one name today, remember that one: Frank Narcisse Jerome. Okay, Frank Narcisse Jerome. And as we move along here, you'll understand why. Frank Narcisse Jerome was a special kind of Raven. He joined in June of 1916. Now, as opposed to the other guys who were all young, we've got Alexander Jerome, that's 19. We've got John Becerra, we're not quite sure how old he was. We've got Barney Kondo, who's 22. Narcisse Jerome's a grown man. He's 30 years old when he volunteers, which makes a difference. There's a difference between 18 and 30. And he grew up. Alistair has an idea where the house was.
He used to live like where where the store is, right between that area. So he had like his own home there, and the rest of it he was married after and got divorced, and there was a lot of things that happened in his life. I'm not going to steal it from him, but that's where he lived.
Yeah.
And he had kids.
So now we've got Frank Narcisse Jerome volunteers, joins the army, and now we're back to Europe again. Back to Barney. Barney's still alive and kicking, and he's in the thick of things. And he moves from the Ypres down to a place called the Somme. The Somme is actually a region.
There's no song.
So it's about 120 kilometers, straight south. Now the Somme, the Battle of the Somme is kind of if anybody's going to be into military history, that's a name that you're going to hear a lot. The Battle of the Somme. This is a town called Courcelette in France. This is where the Canadians were. Barney Kondo was one of them there. Just to give you an idea of how many people were there, next page, thank you. Just to give you an idea how many people were in that area. And we're talking, the Somme is an area of about, imagine Listagouche to here. Imagine that as a sort of a distance-wise. The Battle of the Somme took place in a region about that size. Check out the amount of people. 1.5 million Commonwealth soldiers. Commonwealth is England, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and India in the First World War. 1.5 million Commonwealth soldiers, 1.4 million French soldiers, 1.5 million German soldiers. Now, who's good at math here? That's 4.4 million soldiers in an area, like I say, from here to Listagouche. That's a lot of people. And out of that 4.4 million, 1.2 million casualties. It's just unbelievable. It's the bloodiest battle in the history of mankind. The Germans call it the bloodbath. That area, that battle. just brutal. And of course, lots and lots of Canadian cemeteries there. Barney fought there and survived, but there's a lot of Canadians that didn't survive. Just for the town of Gaspé itself, we're going to talk about Gaspé for just 2 seconds. Just the town of Gaspé, in that cemetery there were 6 people from a little town like Gaspé. So the fellow there where the rose is there, that's William Palmer. He's from Gaspé. Yeah. All right, so now we go back to Alexander and Frank Narcisse Jerome. They arrive at the front on December of 1916. Frank Narcisse Jerome is transferred to the 14th Battalion. The 14th Battalion is the Royal Montreal Regiment. It still exists today. And they don't know a whole lot about, they didn't know, up until a couple of months ago, they didn't know a whole lot about Frank Narcisse Jerome. They know a lot more about it now. So Frank Narcisse Jerome heads to the front in an infantry battalion, whereas Alexander Jerome is posted to a tunneling company. He did digging tunnels, which is a brutal thing too. Like all the trenches and all that there, they had to be dug there. It wasn't done mechanically, it was done with a pick and a shovel. And he did that for a while. So pretty brutal. So the Canadians moved from Courcelette up to Vimy. Now most of us have at least probably heard of Vimy somewhere before. The $20 bill, on the reverse side of the $20 bill there's Vimy. There's a reason why it's sort of a highly revered place there. It's very well for a couple of reasons. Okay, well, sorry. So the boys, Alexander and Narcisse Jerome and Barney Kondo leave the Somme and they go to Vimy. In the meantime, Milton Gideon from here, he volunteers. Now, Milton Gideon was a policeman here in the community, and notice some people related to him here. You remember him?
Yeah.
Milton Gideon. And,
He's related to Gordon and them?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
from
It's,
place?
Indian Jones' grandfather.
Okay.
Yep.
there you go. Good job. So he leaves, Milton Gideon joins the army, is shipped over to England just like the rest of them. He arrives in England on April 7th, 1917, which is 2 days before the Battle of Vimy Ridge. So he didn't, luckily for him, he wasn't there in time for the Battle of Vimy Ridge, which is not the case for Frank Narcisse Jerome, Alexander Jerome, and Barney Kondo. They're there. This is the memorial at Vimy Ridge.
Is that the one right here?
Exactly, that's it here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just an enormous thing. I don't remember how tall it is, but it's like well over 100 feet tall. And in the weeks that preceded the battle, the Canadians fired an artillery barrage. So essentially, the Germans were where the monument is. So in the weeks that preceded the battle, we shelled the German positions, relentlessly. Some Germans compared it to water coming out from a hose. The amount of shells that were being fired into the thing. 100 years later, you still see the. This was taken in November. This shot. So 100 years later, you still see the scars on the land of the what was caused by the shot. These are the trenches. So on the morning
Still
of
exist?
yeah. So on the morning of April 9th, 1917, 100,000 Canadian soldiers, including Barney Kondo, Frank Narcisse Jerome, Alexander Jerome, left the trenches and attacked the German positions. But 4 hours later, it was all over. The Canadians had taken Vimy Ridge, but all the soldiers went through, not necessarily that particular trench, because there was 100,000 people, so there was a lot more trenches than that one there. But they left the trenches and come up over the top. This is sort of what it looked like at the time. You can see that it's not a very pleasant situation. That metal thing is basically just a guard, so you can peek through for hours.
Yeah.
could tell that certainly wasn't pleasant there. Imagine, heavy artillery fire and there's machine guns and rifles. It's just hell. We're running through hell. On that day, April 9th, 1917, was the single deadliest day in Canadian military history. 3,900 Canadian soldiers were killed. Another 11,000 were wounded. One day. That's a lot. That's a lot. Thankfully, Barney, Narcisse, and Alexander come out of Vimy Ridge unscathed, not a scratch. So, good for them. Shortly after the Battle of Vimy Ridge, as we're going chronologically again, the boys are shipped to a place called Hill 70, which is about 10 kilometers straight ahead from Vimy. That's the monument to Hill 70. So if they put a monument, there's a reason. This is the 14th Battalion. Now at this point, Milton Gideon has joined the boys. So Milton Gideon is in the same battalion as Frank Narcisse Jerome. They would have known each other from here. Milton Gideon, like I said, would have joined them. And Milton was quite a bit younger than Narcisse, so we can imagine a scenario there where he's sort of looking out for him. And this is the 14th Battalion. This is their actual unit there. So it's quite possible that Frank Narcisse Jerome was in this photograph. We don't know. But they're heading towards battle. Now, this is from the war diary of the 58th Battalion. 58th Battalion is Barney Kondo. Barney Kondo is coming back in the story here. War diary. I'll spare you all of it there, but just give you an idea, a taste of it there. Very heavy casualties were inflicted on the enemy. 30 dead being counted in each trench. All ranks behaved well, and everyone concerned has reason to be proud of the operation. Now, during that operation, there were a bunch of different casualties from the battalion. There was the commanding officer, Captain Henry, was killed, and 9 other ranks were killed, and 2 died of their wounds. So 2 were actually rescued, but they ended up dying later. And this is a military cemetery near Hill 70. That's Captain Henry. That's the line of all the guys that I mentioned there, all those numbers, they're all buried in a line. And that's where it ended for Barney Kondo. He was only 24 years old by the time he was killed. And the poppy is there. It's the same idea. It's Alistair and the flag is from Alistair. And I had the bowl and the sage as well. It's just not in the picture, but we did the whole smudging ceremony and all that there. Well, you can see it there. Yeah, so 24 years old, killed in action. Barney Kondo. From whereabouts would he have lived? Where was his house, roughly?
Right where Albert Kondo's house is right now, around that area in the same spot.
So he's related to that family?
Yeah, that was, what's Corey? I think that's his
Corey?
name,
Yeah.
Corey. That was his grandfather.
So Albert's father?
Huh?
That's Albert's father?
Brother.
Brother?
And see, the thing about this, us nurses and the other one, Betty, that was Betty's uncle. That was the first time that Memorial Day that she found out that was her uncle. She didn't know all this time because nobody mentioned anything about nurses or, yeah.
Another thing we have to keep in mind too is just remember what the population here was 100 years ago. The population wasn't very big there. It was kind of a few hundred then.
112.
Something like that there. And you've got all these people there. And I didn't even mention the ones that didn't actually make it to England. The ones that were recruited to join the army, but for some reason or another didn't make it to the. I'm just talking about the ones that actually made it to the front. So it's a pretty impressive group there. Considering that, and I didn't really mention this, considering that they didn't have to volunteer in the first place there, they could have just stayed home, and they chose to volunteer. No.
Alex Senior,
Both
joined
wars.
twice, yeah.
Alexander Jerome Senior volunteered twice. He volunteered in the First World War and the Second World War. Considering what he'd seen in the First World War, you'd think that, yeah, it's okay, I'll skip my turn. But no.
It's a duty.
A pretty brave crew. So after all of this, and you've got Vimy, and then you've got Hill 70, and even before that, there was the Somme and everything else we talked about there. So if you're looking at it from a standpoint of, well, at this point, John Vicaire has died, Barney Congo has died. So at this point, the most experienced soldier of the crew there, that bunch, is Frank Narcisse Jerome.
Yeah.
And so they've gone through all this, they're Vimy, Hill 70, and all that. Now they're heading into, as if it can't possibly get any worse, it actually does. They end up going to a place called Passchendaele. Passchendaele is just a little bit north of Ypres, so they're back in Belgium. And Passchendaele is considered by all the veterans of the First World War, consider Passchendaele hell. You hear references to hell all over the place in the writings. First of all, it rained throughout the whole fall. So you end up with this kind of stuff there, like that. Mud. This mud. And essentially the situation there is the Canadians are surrounding the town of Passchendaele. The Germans are occupying the town of Passchendaele. And originally the Canadian strategy was just, we'll encircle them and eventually they're going to give up because,
Yeah.
but back then we were subject to British rule and the British commanders wanted us to take Passchendaele, and we ended up taking Passchendaele to the cost of 15,000 Canadian casualties. But yeah, so you can imagine yourself there, living like that, mud pit like that. Plus you're being shot at, and it's just nothing friendly about that. Just to give you an idea of the destruction. So this is Passchendaele, and remember this is over 100 years ago. So this is Passchendaele taken from imagine an airplane 100 years ago, like one of those two biplane things there.
Yeah.
You know, sort of like that there. And there's a guy hanging out the window. That's how that picture was taken. That's Passchendaele's scene before the war. That's what it looked like after. So you get an idea. I know it's pretty dramatic. I've been to Passchendaele, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times, something like that. And every time I go there, I still get the chills. There's something about the place that's creepy there. There's another entry, just to give you a little taste of what these guys are going through. There's an entry from the 14th Battalion War Diary. This is the crew that Milton Gideon and Frank Narcisse Jerome are in. November 3rd, 1917, at 1:40 a.m., a party of the enemy, means a group of the enemy, about 60 strong on the left front, so on that side, was dispersed by Lewis gun fire and artillery fire. Now, the reason why I want to talk about Lewis gun, because this Lewis gun is going to be an integral part of the story from here on in. That's a Lewis gun. Give me a...
That's what I was talking about, Alex.
Frank Narcisse Jerome, when he first arrived at the front, was a crew member on one of these things. Now, the picture that we see here, that's taken at a firing range. You see everybody's clean, this is not during battle. But in normal circumstances, the Lewis gun was a crew of, depending, 4 or 5. The commander of the guy who's in charge would carry this thing, the tripod or bipod. He'd carry the bipod, and then one guy would carry the gun, and the other guys would carry boxes of ammunition. And those drums, those things, they come in 2 different sizes, 47 rounds and 97 rounds. 500 to 600 rounds a minute. Yeah. So it's widely recognized as the classic machine gun. When military historians and people who are into that kind of stuff think about a machine gun, they think about that. Now this was Frank Narcisse Jerome's area of expertise. This is the Memorial Park in Passchendaele. And just to give you an idea that they haven't forgotten there, even though it's 100 years later, the name of the street is called Canada Lane. And just this past November, they had a nighttime thing with torches a memorial thing for Canadians. But these are Belgians that are doing this stuff. People who live in Passchendaele. Doing this 100 years later, they still remember. Thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, so the Battle of Passchendaele happens, the mud and all that. Now we're in November 1917. 15,000 casualties. Now they move back down south again. They're on the move again. And they're going to a place called Avignon, France. Now, yeah, I'll skip all the details, the gory details. If anybody's interested and really wants to know about this, I can certainly transfer all of these things for you. But just to let you know, at this point, this is where Frank Narcisse Jerome was first decorated for bravery in Avignon, France. And it's important. I think it's important to take the time to actually read what's written there, because we're going to try to put yourself in the shoes of the person that they're talking about. Okay, first of all, it says, for bravery and devotion to duty, near Avignon, on the nights of November 27th, 28th, 29th, and 30th, so that's 4 nights. And of course, 4 nights just after, 4 nights, while a member of a Lewis gun crew, now they're talking about Frank Narcisse Jerome, is who they're talking about here, he's badly shaken twice by explosion of shells. Okay, so twice. Shells are exploding nearby him, and it knocks him back and all that, twice. This man continued at duty and assisted in repelling 2 enemy raids. So, shells explode near him, he's kicked back, then the enemy comes at him and he repels them with his Lewis gun. Twice. And then later, after all this was done, and he did this twice, and after this was done, he formed a patrol for identification. What that means is, because essentially you would have a trench of Germans, a German trench, and a Canadian trench facing each other. What's in the middle is called no man's land. So there were the patrol to obtain identifications. What that means is he actually went and identified bodies and is wounded or not wounded. In this instance, they're dead comrades. Takes some pretty serious courage to do something like that. And his coolness under fire was a brilliant incentive to all ranks. So that's Frank Narcisse Jerome. Now, if he had just done that, he'd be special. But as we'll see, that's not the last we've heard of Frank Narcisse Jerome. Oh, jeez, I could have shown that. I could have shown this. Sorry. And that's what the medal he was presented with was called. It's actually called the military medal. That's what it's called. That's what it looks like. The front and the back there looks like that. So that would mean that in military terms, he would now be known as Frank Narcisse Jerome, comma MM. He now has those initials MM. Because you'll notice that some of these over here, when you have a look, you'll see that there's some people have initials after their names. So Frank Narcisse Jerome, MM. This is again talking about essentially the same thing. It's just unbelievable the stuff that they have to put up with it. So in spring and summer, he gets the first decoration in November, December of 1917. Winter passes. Spring, they move down even a little further south in France. A place called Amiens, France. There a lot of heavy fighting there too, as you'll see. This is sort of what the city of Amiens looked like then. And this is a casualty clearing station. These are wounded soldiers there on stretchers and that. Frank Narcisse Jerome, Milton Gideon, Alexander Jerome are all part of the fighting that's going on there. That's a group of German prisoners taken at Amiens. Some pile of soldiers. And just to give you an idea of the scope, how many people were involved in this. That's just one group. That's German soldiers that were taken by the Canadians. August of 1918, 14th Battalion, again, this is from their war diary, just to give you this a little taster. Numerous acts of gallantry. Gallantry is another word for bravery under fire. Numerous acts of gallantry. August 8th, 1918. They captured, the Canadians, the 14th Battalion, captured 10 German field guns, those big guns that we saw earlier at Ypres. Captured 10 of those. Then 46 machine guns. And we saw the piles of soldiers that they captured there. They captured the 10 German field guns, 46 machine guns, and 8 mortars. Mortars were the weapons I was saying, they dropped that ammo in it and it fires out there. That was Frank Narcisse Jerome and his gang did that. All right, now, while this is going on, we're going back to Milton for a second. Milton was both lucky and unlucky. Milton Gideon was hit by machine gun fire on the day of August 8th, 1918. The day that they captured all those weapons that I was just talking about. That same day, Milton Gideon is hit by machine gun fire in the leg. Just think about that for a second. Hit in the leg with machine gun fire. A 7.992 millimeter rounds. But he's sort of lucky. If you're gonna get hit by machine gun fire, there's no bone or nerve damage. It took me a while to decipher what all this means because it's all written by doctors, but that's no bone or nerve involvement, is what those words are. So in other words, you got shot in the leg, but just in the muscle. So, but that's where Milton Gideon's war ended. It's the end of the war for him. He survived. Came back here and became a policeman.
Wasn't he,
He used to chase Alistair all over town.
saved by Narcisse too? He was carried.
Well, Narcisse was there.
Yeah.
Narcisse was there. Now,
Milton's house used to be where Arma's house is right now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Again, this is another war diary entry. I'll spare you all the details. It was just to say that in it here it says machine guns put up a very fine fight. Now, Frank Narcisse Jerome. So Milton's wounded. Frank Narcisse Jerome survives, and ends up with. You'll notice something a little different about the military medal here. See this thing? Thing there, that bar. That's exactly what that's called. It's called a bar. So in other words, when you're awarded the military medal for bravery, if you win another one, they don't give you another medal. You start adding bars to it. So if you see something like this, it means that the person who's wearing it has been awarded this medal twice. So Frank Narcisse Jerome was awarded a second military medal for his actions capturing those machine guns that I was talking about, the German machine guns. So I think we're starting to get the picture as far as Frank Narcisse Jerome. It's a little out of the ordinary as far as soldiers go. Just bear with me. I've got maybe 10 minutes left. So now we're in the summer of 1918. Now the war is really starting to go in Canada as far as the sector where Canada is concerned, and the war is really turning in our favor. The last 100 days of the First World War, the Canadians, basically it's just Canadians chasing the Germans back into Germany. And then this is where it starts. We're heading towards Germany. Germany's to the east, that way. The 14th Battalion, the outfit that Frank is in, and the 87th, which is where Alexander is at this point. He also falls along here. They go from Amiens to a little town, you'll see in a second, just a little town. It's only a couple hundred people live there. It says they're about 75 kilometers to the east. Now here, old Frank comes to the. This is as far as I'm concerned. This is Frank Narcisse Jerome's finest hour that's coming up here. You'll notice on the map this thing here. That's a canal, and that's called the Canal du Nord. So if you're ever interested in First World War history, Canal du Nord is an important battle. this is where it was decisively, it's almost like we put the nail in the coffin. I don't know if that's, I don't know if I like that expression, but this is where we ended it. Okay, so Frank Narcisse Jerome and the 14th Battalion are coming this way. Okay, coming from here to there, to that bridge. They get across the bridge. Now, first of all, they're moving in battalion formation. So at the front are the scouts and the snipers are at the front. Again, we're at this point, a battalion was 1,000 men at the beginning of the war, but with everybody getting wounded and killed and all that, the battalions at this point are down to 650 men. But still, no. So essentially they're marching into this town, and this town has been occupied by the Germans for 3 years. So they're well set up and well fortified. They know that this is German territory. So the 14th Battalion goes in, snipers and scouts first, then sort of the body of the battalion, most of the men, and at the back are the Lewis guns in this instance, because you didn't want to lead with your Lewis guns because they're their most valuable weapon. You don't want to lose them on the back. So they go out to they cross the bridge, and as soon as they get across the bridge, the Germans open up. Or not as soon as they get across. They let the scouts and they let the snipers go through, but they wait until the main body of the battalion goes through, and then the Germans open fire on the Canadians. So right across here. So essentially, when they get in here, they start firing. Now the Germans, like I said, they've been occupying this territory, this town for a couple of years. So they have machine guns set up all over the place. Second and inside buildings and second stories and on roofs of barns and all kinds of things. So Frank Narcisse Jerome at this point is in the back here with his Lewis guns.